investment banker and a broker, and he has a fascinating story to tell us. So welcome, Keith, and over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Very nice to join your group. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about my role as an undercover agent with the US Department of Justice, working in the United States, principally in Mexico and Colombia. So to sort of give you a historical aspect of how that happened and how your life can change in an instant, I was running an investment bank in Melbourne, and I was phoned by a client of mine who was a property developer in Brighton, who said he had someone who was renting his house and he would like to bring in some money to buy a house in Kew because his two daughters went to Mandeville Hall and his son was at Xavier. So I met this guy who was a coffee importer from Central America, and I arranged for the funds to come in through a law firm here. There was no drama with that. And we developed a very good relationship. We became good friends. And then after a period of about 8 weeks, I got a knock on the door. I opened the door at 7 o'clock in the morning, thinking it was other children looking for a lift to school with mine, when I saw the state police, federal police, the FBI and the DEA attaches from the American embassy and the Mexican federal police, and they asked if they could have a word with me. I said, "Do I have a choice?" And they said, "No, you don't." So to cut a long story short, they told me that the person that I had had coffee and developed a relationship with was a #1 banker for the drug cartels in Mexico and Colombia. He had been a fugitive for 4 years and been on the run. And then he escaped out of Mexico and went to Spain and then into France and Switzerland and then back to Spain and then eventually arrived in Australia under a false identity. And that because I had developed a relationship with him, he in turn had said to the cartels that he had found a possible new banker for them, being myself. I had no knowledge of this because all his conversations would be listened to by the US Department of Justice and by the Mexican federal police. So they asked, would I consider taking on a new role, working for the US Department of Justice as an undercover agent, and that I would in turn become the banker for the drug cartels. They said it's one of the most dangerous assignments in the world. Being sent to Iraq or Afghanistan is a walk in the park compared to the assignment I was going to take on. So to cut a long story short, I didn't have a choice. They said that the keys to the financial operations of the cartels was terribly important. No one knew how they banked their money, where the money went to. And to give you an idea, which is very hard to understand, but to most of you, you all know money. The drug cartels are controlled by 5 families, and their income is twice what BHP Billiton use. So it's $500 billion. And in 2000, when I was involved, it was just over 300 billion. And today, according to the Department of Justice, and I work still for the US Department of Justice, there's over $1 trillion from criminal proceeds that are washed through the banking system in New York and London, as well as in Dubai and Hong Kong. It's a massive amount of money. So my role was to fly to San Diego, which I did, and I set up a bank, a private bank called Wessex Finance, and we established a bank in the British Virgin Islands. And I knew nothing about the cartels. I mean, I'd seen a film called Traffic, and I did some research, but the US Department of Justice worked on the assumption the less you knew, the safer you were. So I set up the bank in San Diego, and I learned very quickly. I love chess. So to play an undercover agent, you really have to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of anyone else. And you have to work out what everybody's going to do, work out the move the opposition is going to do. So I felt, for example, I couldn't trust the agencies, and I'll come to that point. So, because there is always a mole within an agency, and you've seen it with the British during the war. You always get some mole who's reporting your activities. And so particularly within the DEA and the FBI, there are moles paid for by the drug cartels and criminal organizations. So I knew that was the case, and I was informed by the deputy director of the DEA that there is always a possibility of a mole. So working on that assumption, any of your operations in Mexico and Colombia could be compromised. And if so, then the risks are very high. You can be executed. The only way, if you are feeling you're in any form of danger, then we'll work out exit strategies and what we can do to extradite you out of Mexico. Easy said than done. But so when you're given an operation, 25% of your time is trying to work out, what have I been compromised? What happens if someone within the DEA has provided the information to the cartels? And if so, then chances of my survival could be limited. It could be executed. And then you've got the agents, the drug cartels themselves. They are very good at sniffing out undercover agents. And to give you an example, and you've probably seen it on television these days with Escobar and other television series about the drug cartels coming out of Mexico. If you take the 5 families, they range between 12,000 and 20,000 troops. In other words, they call them foot soldiers. These are people who are loyal to the hierarchy of the drug cartels, and they are brutal. And within that organization, they have what they call an intelligence or security team. And the security team consists of ex-military intelligence officers from Argentina and Chile, Brazil, Venezuela. And their role is to sniff out opposition and at the same time to sniff out if there is an undercover agent that is infiltrated their organization. So my role was simply to bank the cash. Now, I have seen cash. I've never seen cash like I've seen what the Mexicans can produce. And you've probably seen films and television where they have box loads of cash. And they have storerooms full of cash. So the cartels are very good at their, fighting wars between themselves, but they're good at shipping the cocaine, particularly cocaine out of Colombia, into Mexico and then across the border into the United States. The consumption of cocaine in America is rising at an enormous rate, as it is globally. So the organization of these 5 cartels is that they control the cocaine market worldwide and global. So the cocaine is grown in Colombia, shipped to Mexico. And from Mexico, they then control the distribution to Brazil, across to Africa, into Europe, and from Mexico across the United States. The US and Canada are the big markets. Australia is a growing market, and Europe is as well. So they control that whole distribution, just 5 families. I mean, there are other small cartels, but principally those major families. And they they work with an enormous amount of bodyguards. I mean, to meet the cartel leader, you are literally, you're trembling. And if you tremble, then you're showing fear. And if you show fear, then they feel that they can trust you. So for 3 years, I operated undercover effectively. I was always planned my strategy, planned my move. And if I had a meeting, I would go to the meeting 3 or 4 hours beforehand, work out exit strategies. I did everything I possibly could to convince the people that I was working for, that's the cartels, that I wasn't an agent, and I was very good at laundering their money. I was better at it than anyone else. But the problem was that I wouldn't record any of the conversations. So basically, one of the US Department of Justice wanted to do was record the conversations. So they would have a phone like this, and when you push it, it would record for 90 minutes. And they wanted me to record conversations. I wouldn't do it. The simple reason being, if you got caught recording the conversations, you would be immediately executed. And I felt I could control everything, but I couldn't, and I wouldn't use the recording device. And I had one was this, the other recording device is a pen, like that, where you push and you can record for 45 minutes. And nowadays we have very sophisticated cases. We use computer issues like this, which is to lock into your laptop, and this will record for an hour. And we use also other gadgets, which I can't disclose to you because I still work for the US Department of Justice. So I was called back to San Diego, and in San Diego, the regional director plus the state prosecutors had a meeting with me and said, we have to record. We know you're not comfortable with this. Well, what we've decided to do is to bring in another agent. And his name was Al. And Al had worked undercover in Colombia for 27 years. He was Colombian. He was a policeman in Colombia. And he had operated out of Miami. And he was quite successful in Colombia. But he had now been arrested, not being used as an undercover agent anymore because he had been exposed in Colombia. So we had a meeting in a motel in San Diego. So I'm in a motel room with several agents, including the regional director and the state prosecutor, or the state attorney general of California, who said, we've got to record these conversations. So when we go to court, we've got something concrete. And they told me I was going to Mexico the following morning at 8 o'clock on an 8 o'clock flight from San Diego to Dallas and down to Mexico City. And then they opened the door between my motel unit to the unit next door, and then walked Al, this undercover agent from Colombia, with 2 DEA agents. And they said, Al is going to fly with you. Now, I hate surprises. I'm very organized. I'm very thorough in what I do. And that's why I survived 23 years working undercover and running operations for the US government. And I'm still employed by them. So I said, I don't like surprises. I don't like this guy. My first impression is this won't work. And I gave them all the reasons. And they didn't accept any and told me that I had to work with him and go down to Mexico the following morning with him. So they suggested we go and have dinner together, which we did. And when we arrived at the bar cum restaurant, he saw a girl in the distance and turned to me and said, see you tomorrow morning. And he wandered off to chat up with the girl. And I thought, well, this guy is a cowboy. And there's a lot of cowboys working within the police force and various agents. They take risks. They put their lives on the line and they take risks, and their survival rate is very limited. They don't survive. So I didn't see him again until the flight. And he boarded the flight with me down to Mexico. And he fell asleep on the plane. So I couldn't communicate with him. And I was really stressing out. I thought to myself, we're going to arrive in Mexico. Although this is not new territory for him, he needs to know who I'm meeting, what are the ground rules, and how are we going to play this. I would have loved to have had a day going through strategies with him, but he wouldn't. We arrived in Mexico City, he disappeared. And he fronted up at 10 o'clock in the morning, or 5 to 10, for a meeting with the two bankers from a cartel family. And the two bankers were not happy that I brought this guy along. Now, I haven't had a conversation with Al. I haven't, as I said to you, I haven't had this opportunity. So the only thing I could say to him is, when it comes to banking, let me do the talking. Don't you do any talking, because I'm a banker and you're not. And less you say, the better off we are. And then after this meeting, we'll work out what we're going to do in regard to further meetings that we're going to have here in Mexico. And the two bankers were quite astute. And I introduced him to Al. And they said, we're not comfortable with him being at this meeting. So they looked at him and they said, we're going to ask you a question. And the question's relating to banking, and we want you to answer. We don't want you to answer it, Keith. And they asked him, could he explain discounted cash flows? Because he had no idea. And then they asked him what he could tell them about interest arbitrage. Once again, he had no idea. And they then said to him, you're not a banker. And at that point, a waiter turned up with coffee to provide coffee to us, and said to Al in Spanish, would you like milk with your coffee? And Al responded in Spanish, which is another mistake. And they immediately recognized from his accent when he said, no, I don't want milk in my coffee. Thank you very much. Go away. Basically, that's what he said in Spanish. And they could tell from his Spanish accent, he came from Colombia. And they immediately got up and said, we're not dealing with you. And I knew then, at 10:10 in the morning, at the Intercontinental Hotel in Mexico City, we had less than 3 hours to get out of Mexico, otherwise we're going to be executed. So, because these two would go back and report to the cartel that there was something wrong with the person that I was with. And the cartels don't hesitate. If there's the slightest thing that they're not agreeable with, they'd rather execute those people than have a risk. So I rushed back to our other hotel where we're at, with Al in tow, who kept apologising, and I kept saying, don't apologise. Just don't talk to me. I was so upset. But we phoned the DEA head office in San Diego, and I told them exactly what had transpired. And they said, we had another meeting 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the meeting was with another cartel family, and we were given cash, significant amount of cash, in excess of $10 million. And they wanted us to wait until 2 o'clock and to go to that meeting. I said, we don't have 2 o'clock. I said, 2 o'clock, we could be executed. And they said, no, you'll be right. Just relax. Get to the meeting and we'll work out an exit strategy. Because it's from the center of Mexico City to the airport, it's 3 hours by car. And then you have to wait at the airport until a flight. So I got the impression the DEA were organising maybe transport for us from the American military. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get out of Mexico City. So 2 o'clock, I am perspiring like it was, you just couldn't believe. And we went to the meeting. And as we went to the meeting, I noticed that there was a lot of people on motorbikes, bodyguards around the Intercontinental Hotel. And I knew then that this was probably from one of the second tier cartel families and very dangerous. So we went to the actual meeting itself, and the meeting was on the 23rd floor of the Intercontinental Hotel, and we were to meet a Mexican banker who was acting for this cartel. And then, so when we walked in, the Mexican banker didn't like this look of Al. Didn't like the look of him. And to cut a long story short, because it's in this book here, Undercover, by 2:15, Al had been executed. And I was in the room. So the Mexican banker had been shot, he was dead. Al was dead, I was alive. I screamed at the DEA, and when I ran the DEA, you can visualize a room of 20 to 30 agents with television screens, and they hooked into television screens throughout Mexico City. And I was telling them exactly the situation. I had to take photographs of Al, dead on the bed in the hotel suite we're in. And then they said to me, "We need to get you out of Mexico." Now, there's one thing I learned is what they said, I did the opposite. I decided that at that point, my chances of getting to the airport, which is 3 hours away, are very slim. Because of the shootout in the hotel room, all the cartels now would know about my situation being an undercover agent for the DEA. I had to think what I could do to save myself. The DEA then put in a plan to rescue myself out of Mexico by organising a flight out of Dallas to head to Mexico City. So Dallas to Mexico is 3 hours. So they said the flight had already departed. That means I had 3 hours to get to the airport, board the flight, and get back to the United States. It was a CIA plane, or Department of Justice plane, which is for American diplomats and State Department officials. But I knew that I could never make that plane. So I worked out my own exit strategy in the hotel room. And when they said turn right, I'd turn left. So I managed to get out of Mexico City myself. And I managed to get out of Mexico. And I did that through a string of just working out logically the best escape route and doing everything contrary to what the US Department of Justice was saying. They were trying to record me. I threw the phone away because I knew the phone could be tapped. So I just worked out my own strategy and got out. So when I got back to the United States, then I had to go in what they call witness protection program. Now I had another family, so the family I had was what they call a sponsored families. In other words, when you work with the drug cartels work out who your family is, where they go to school, who your wife is, so that if anything goes wrong, they'll kidnap them and use them as hostages. So that when the situation at the hotel exploded and Al was murdered, the family in San Diego had been taken by the DEA to New York. So we're in a witness protection program for basically less than 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks, the drug cartels found us twice. And what they do is they take your photograph and put it on the phone. And because the Hispanics, there's 48 million Hispanics living in the United States. a lot of them send their money home to Mexico and other parts of Central and South America. And a lot of that money, when they send home, is not through Western Union, but it's through another organisation which is owned and controlled by friends of the drug cartels. So they take your photograph and they send it out to all the Mexicans or Hispanics. So the Hispanics who work in fast food restaurants, shopping malls, clean houses, mow lawns, drive taxis, have got a photograph of you, and they're offered a reward if they can actually know where you are. So we were spotted twice. In each individual case, I was able to escape. Once again, without the help of the US Marshals or the FBI or the DEA. I did everything myself, planned escape. And then I realized you can't outrun the cartels. You simply can't outrun them. So what you can do is go back and see them. So it's getting back to insurance. So when I was working for the US Department of Justice, there was 5 families, as I mentioned to you. I realized that if something went horribly wrong, I couldn't rely on the US government. I had to rely on my friends from Mexico. Now I went to boarding school, so you never pinpoint another person. So the guy who was arrested and thrown in prison here, name of Carlos Cabal and Marco Bassini, I befriended them in Mexico. And through them, I met the head of the cartels in Mexico City, a guy called Rafael Marcos. And I protected them. I never gave them up, I protected them. It was in my insurance. If things went wrong, there was a chance that they could protect me. And of the 5 families, I gave up 3, protected 2. And the 2 I protected was the Felix organization out of Tijuana and the Gulf Cartel, 2 of the strongest cartels. And that was my insurance. So I came to the conclusion I couldn't outrun them. I knew that my family in Melbourne, my family that with me in the United States, were exposed and could be executed. So I decided to fly back to Mexico myself. So I flew back to Mexico, enormous risk. And I worked on the assumption that I had learned from Carlos Cabal, if I gave myself up to the cartels, then they would only execute me and not my family. So I went back to Mexico City. I called for a meeting with Carlos Cabal, Marco Bassini, and I sat down with them. And I convinced them, because I'd never betrayed them, never gave them up, that I wasn't a DEA agent. As a consequence of that, that's why I can walk the streets today. And the FBI director at the time was Mueller, who investigated Donald Trump. And you probably have all read about Mueller. He was the FBI director for 20 odd years. And so when I flew back to the United States, I was recruited by Mueller, the FBI, and I've worked for the FBI ever since, and the US Department of Justice. And in fact, my old boss, Jeff Sessions, who was the Federal Attorney General, was coming to Australia in November as a guest at a conference that I'm running on cybercrime with the Australian government. So I met Mueller, and Mueller said, your strategies and how you got out of Mexico and how you played the game with the cartels, we've got to adopt that, because you're the only person who's worked 7 years at that stage, 7 years undercover and survived. The longest person prior to that was 6 months, and you did 7 years. So we got to figure out exactly how your mind works. And we want you to teach our agents how to think on their own feet and to throw everything out the window that we think is logical, and to follow your instructions in terms of how to survive. And from the FBI, I went to the Middle East, and I worked in the Middle East from 2005 to 2015. And my role was working with not only the American agencies, but with Saudi Arabia intelligence, and we're working in Iraq and in Syria with Sunni and Shiite militia. And then I worked in Afghanistan with the drugs coming out of Afghanistan into Pakistan and into the Balkans, and dealt with the Russian mafia. I've also dealt with human trafficking in North Africa and also in Budapest, where girls are shipped from the Middle East into Europe and sold to the sex trade industry. And so I was able to infiltrate the criminal group, and with that group we were able to save a lot of girls. And in addition to that, shipped across to North Africa. And my role was based in Djibouti, which is on the Horn of Africa. And the role was to try and work out strategies to disrupt the human trafficking of refugees coming out of Africa across the Mediterranean into Europe. And so I had all that experience, but at the same time, you know, I was caught in the Middle East by a militia, and we were rescued. And that's part of my second book called The Banker. And I've just recently sold my stories. This is the Undercover, The Banker, and another book called Behind the Wire Fence to Netflix, and Netflix producing a television series to be released next year or the year after, subject to the US Department of Justice approving the scripts, as I am still employed by them. So, gentlemen, that's my this morning's discussion with you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Keith. Are there any questions?
Please unmute yourself before you question.
Sorry?
I'm just asking the members to unmute themselves if they wish to pose a question, because at this stage everybody's muted, as you do when you're dealing with a topic like this.
Keith, let me ask you, how do you sleep at night?
I'm okay. I mean, I wrote the book and I thought that would have implications, but I sent the draft to Mexico because I didn't betray three of the most powerful people in Mexico. That's why I can sleep at night. They, in fact, I think, protect me. And to give you an idea, I mean, the three people in Mexico, particularly one, they say that Carlos Sim, who's Mexican, is the third or fourth richest man in the world, certainly in the top 5. But the guy who's the main banker for the cartels would have to be one of the richest men in the world. I mean, we know from the US Department of Justice, his estimated wealth as of December last year was 23 billion. And Carlos Cabal, Marco Pacini are worth just under 10 billion each. So, and these guys are very clever. I mean, Carlos Cabal won a scholarship to Harvard. He did an MBA from Harvard. Rafael Marcos has got a PhD in finance from Columbia University. I mean, these guys are highly qualified and so very switched on. So when it comes to finance and how you not only bank money, but take over companies and do anything like that, these guys are on top of the tree.
Thank
Can
you.
I ask,
Any questions?
question?
Yes.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
You said you're protected by the 3 families you haven't, cartels that you haven't disclosed. How can they protect you against others who may be determined, or well, do they know you're here?
Yes, they do.
I'm flabbergasted.
No, how it works is that the 5 families, so the 5 families work through the 3 main men of Mexico City, and I'm off limits. I am off limits. So they don't, the the two major cartel families protect me and said, and the reason why, I mean, there's no real evidence to that effect other than Mueller, the ex-director of the FBI, and also Jeff Sessions, who's retired, was the federal attorney general, said that, we understand quite clearly you are a protected species from Mexico and Colombia. And whatever you've done down there, your strategies has worked. I mean, no one's prepared to touch you. And that's a nice feeling to have. And, because police forces are, and the Victorian Police Force, I've worked with the Australian Federal Police and also the criminal organisations here. I mean, there's a lot of cowboys in the industry. And I mean, as you know, they work undercover and as a result, they make so many mistakes. And a lot of them get caught up with the money as well. So if you're a criminal organisation, if I was running a criminal organisation here, I would certainly have 10 to 15% of the federal police and the police on my payroll. I'd be paying them for information. And that way, and particularly Central America, I mean, the corruption is enormous. And South America is the same. Corruption goes right to the top. Take the president of Brazil, for example. And the presidents of Mexico in the past have been Argentina, Chile, all these countries. But it also opens up the fact that in the United States, there are senators, congressmen, FBI agents, people working with the police forces, border surveillance, customs, a lot of them, and I would say maybe 8 to 9% of them are on the take and being paid by cartels and criminal organisations. Who are they? Which ones are they? You have no idea. So when you carry out an operation, you need to be well aware of that. And if you sort of go in preparing that the people you're working for, you're going to have a mole within that organisation. Historically, that's what's happened. You take the British Secret Service, the MI6, MI5. They've had Russian moles within their organisation. And also during the war, and fighting the Germans, they had German spies within their organisation. And the same with the IRA. The British had moles within the IRA, and the IRA had people within the police force providing them information and who these moles were. So you have to be very, very careful.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, I've got one or two. Congratulations, Keith, to be here to tell us the story.
Thanks, Roger.
What you've been through. Keith, just just changing tact a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Mexico City. It's a huge city, and it's very high up. It's rarefied air. And the second part of that is, how did you get from there to the airport for the 3 hours?
Okay, Mexico City itself is, you're right, it's one of the highest altitude cities in the world, and you can always, and Roger, you with your background with the Olympic Games and in rowing, but you would have heard about and read about Ron Clark when he ran that 10,000 meters. He collapsed in a heap because of the high altitude. The air is very high, but you get used to it after a period of time, and also it's on like a lagoon. Mexico City, built on a lagoon, as you're probably well aware of. It's a beautiful city, 27 million people, population of Australia and New Zealand combined. And so there are parts of the city that you feel safe in, particularly around where the embassies are, Los Marmos, and that's where I was based, and I felt perfectly safe. And the people themselves are beautiful people, great people to work with, and particularly just the normal Mexican people. They'll take their shirt off to give it to you. Now, getting back to how I got out was ironic thing, we had a girl called Adriana Sanchez who actually phoned me when I was in the hotel room trying to work out what to do. And she phoned to say, "Oh, Keith, I hear you're in Mexico City." So knowing that she was downstairs and she had a car, I managed to convince her to take me not to the main airport. We went to a private airport where you had, light aircraft, like Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne. And I took myself to Moorabbin Airport. Now, I had a lot of cash. I had quite a few $1 million on me at the time from the money that was in the hotel room. So I was able to pay and get light aircraft to fly to another town, and from another town I worked my way into Texas. But I did it. I'd like a chessboard. I flew in one direction, then got a plane and flew in another direction. So if I was being followed, I was, they wouldn't identify me rushing towards the US border. And you've got to read the book, Roger.
Thank you. And just to cover the sporting side, Australia has very fond memories there, apart from Ron Clark, that Ralph Jabell won the 800 metres there, which was one of the very few gold medals ever by Australia in athletics. And secondly, the Australian 8 got the closest ever in the Olympic 8-oared event, finishing second by about a metre or two at the finish. So just to tie up a little bit of today's discussion.
In fact, Ralph Jabell did in 143.6 to equal Peter Snell's record in the 800 metres. And Peter Norman came second with the silver medal. And that was when the two Africans saluted Black Power, and Peter Norman stood still. And how those two Afro-American athletes were brought out to Australia when he passed away, Peter Norman, and they built a statue at the Olympic track here in Melbourne in recognition of Peter Norman. A magnificent.
I think Rod has a question. Is that right, Rod?
Bob Wigg's also trying to ask a question, Simon.
Okay.
Bob Wigg, have you got a question?
Yeah, given the current issues with restrictions in Australia and also with cybercrime, what's your opinion of how the federal government's sided with a number of companies to openly name China as a hacker of one of the Windows programs?
I work with, I've been a guest speaker with the Australian Cyber Security Centre, and I work with Senator Patterson, who's chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security. And I was posted to China. I was based in Shanghai in 2018-19, and I got out prior to the COVID. China are attacking our corporations, but not on the scales they're doing in the United States. At the present moment, the cyber attacks in the United States are enormous. And they are stealing technology, principally out of universities. And they also are shutting down various government departments. They've done that effectively here in Australia. They've done it very effectively in the US. And they occasionally have caused disruption to our banking and financial system. We had a situation a few weeks ago with the Commonwealth Bank. And so cybercrime is on an increasing basis. We have something like 23,000 cybercrime attacks per day, according to the Australian Security Cybercrime Centre in Canberra. And Senator Patterson and the Australian government are terribly concerned about that. We're having a conference in November, which Jeff Sessions, the Federal Attorney General, ex-Federal Attorney General, was coming out for that conference. to discuss with various corporations, and that's been run by some of the top people in Australia, particularly Major General Gavin Davis, who was the Director General of ASIO, and also with the Cyber Crime College associated with Australian National University. And we've also got a woman called Rachel Noble, is worked as head of security for the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and she's currently deputy chairman of the Pine Gap communication, satellite communication with the United States of America, and she's an authority on these attacks that are occurring in Australia. It's worrying, really worrying. But it's not only China, there is ad hocs coming in from various other countries as well. We identified Pakistan recently that have tried to play around with our banking system. Is that associated with the government, or is that just a group of criminals? And then there is also out of Russia as well. And there's criminal groups. I've been involved with cybercrime attacks in the financial centre in London and New York. And there are criminal organisations who play around with cybercrime because it's a huge money spinner for them. So
thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. Well, we've got time for one more question.
President, I suppose the question that occurs to me, maybe I've missed something along the line, but Keith, you were saying you were protected in Mexico by two of these cartels, or two or three, which leaves another two or three that I'm assuming were given up to the authorities by one means or another. You also mentioned that they had thousands and thousands of foot soldiers. It strikes me that as an undercover person, you're not all that undercover these days. How is it that despite the protection you're being given by these two or three families, someone else hasn't been able to get a hold of you and put a bullet through your head?
Well, I think that I know a lot, and I think that how it works, it's different to the criminal organisations in Australia, which don't really care. I mean, they're sort of cowboys in Australia. But in terms of the cartels, a hierarchy, the three major cartel families are very powerful, extremely powerful. And they, in turn, if they say that a person is not to be touched, no one else will touch them. You wouldn't do, the other cartel families would follow suit. They wouldn't want to have a war with a major cartel family or with several cartel families just over a simple fact of just get rid of him. As far as they're concerned, that was a problem that existed. They lost money, they lost people, but they've moved on because they don't want to cause a problem. That's how it works.
Well, thank you very much, Keith. Can I ask Alan Stevens if he'd like to make some observations and thank the speaker?
Keith, that's an incredible story that you've given us, and just quite amazing what you've been through in the last few years, and obviously still having a fair amount to do. It's sort of there's no stopping to it at all. It just seems to be ongoing. I think you definitely raised a point when you said, as far as risk management goes, the default was execute rather than have a risk. And to live under those sort of circumstances is quite incredible. But I wish I was. We had a general meeting and I could shake your hand and say very well done. But I'm sure it was a fascinating talk for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Keith, we normally in a physical meeting present you with something, and we will do so in due course somehow. I guess we'll find out where you are.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Gentlemen, that concludes the meeting. The next meeting is on Tuesday, August the 17th, hopefully at the Hyatt RSL, and we look forward to seeing you all there in person. The committee meeting will take place in 5 minutes. So committee members, if you're all ready in 5 minutes, look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
The lockdown's been extended by another week.
Terrific.
Thanks, Rich.
So that means the
Candlelight.
the candlelight dinner can't go ahead.
Thank you.
Goodbye all. Thank you.
Thank you for a good meeting.
Thank you.